Good evening, everyone. I'm Jay Strang. I'm the Chief School Business Official for Indian Prairie School District. Tonight is the final presentation of the Engage 204, and I'll talk a little bit about finances and summarize some of the other work that was done during the other meetings. For folks that were here, this first slide might be redundant. The board has been responsible enough to ask us to operate within a balanced budget, so we have done that. The times that we've spent into deficit was intentional, and that was for safety or security or to bring our network infrastructure up so that we could take the park assessments and have the technology available to work with our kids, but that's only been on a couple of occasions. We've got an operating budget of $322 million, which is a large budget, and I'll go through a little bit of that with you in the presentation. Our per pupil expenditure, this is our operating expenditure when you think of what it takes to annually operate the district, to pay the utilities, to pay the custodial and maintenance fees, to pay our staff and their benefits, to order the paper and the pens. Our operating expenditure per pupil is $11,468. That's less than the state average of $12,973. And when you look at our operating expenditure per pupil across the country and you adjust for regional cost differences, we're less than the national average. So we operate pretty efficiently. We've got 3,100 employees. Through 2010 and 2014, during our recession, the board really wanted to have an operating budget that was balanced, so we cut $40.8 million out of the budget. We initially tried to do that by staying away from the classrooms, by cutting custodial and maintenance, by cutting capital outlay, which is our roofs repairs and our asphalt repairs, sidewalks, heating and ventilation systems. But then eventually it got into personnel. It got into administrative personnel, classified clerical personnel, and licensed teachers. The district currently has $262 million worth of debt, which is principal and interest, and that is our bond payments for the construction of our schools. We've got about 13 issues left, and that's paying off our buildings, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. All of our debt will be paid off in 2027, so we're 9 years away from having all of our buildings paid off. When I talk about our debt, our outstanding debt, this is not our operating budget. This is just the payment of the physical buildings of our schools, the loans we took out to pay for our schools. We structured the debt so that it was a level, balanced payment throughout the 20-year cycle, and we did that about 10 years ago. And the reason for that was that every year when we levy taxes to pay for our buildings, it's about $28 million. That way your tax bill isn't larger one year and lower the other. It's a steady, even payment cycle. The other reason for that is that we were able to structure our debt and be able to plan moving forward because we knew every year that it was a standard same payment. In 2017, we've got our last payment, which is just over $15 million. We were at one point in time the fastest growing district in the state of Illinois, and we're competing to be the fastest growing district in the country. That was the building boom of the 90s and the early 2000s. I think I've been in the district 28 years, and I've seen a lot of school construction occur over that period of time. We've had building bond referendums, which pay for our schools, and we've had education referendums, which pay for the operations of the buildings. And this is a summary of those over the last 20 years. We've had building bonds that have passed, we had an ed rate that passed, and in 2005 we had a building bond that failed. That was the first attempt to build Mattia Valley High School. So when you think about a $322 million budget, I wanted to put it in some perspective for you. The board asks us to operate on a balanced budget. So at the end of the day, I've got to have a dollar left over. And from going back to 2008 all the way through to 2017, you've got our actual budget and our actual performance. How did we perform? In 2008, We anticipated a $499,000 excess. We had a $2.7 million excess, so we performed a little bit better. In some years, we had deficits, and in those years, the following year, you see that we pick up a little extra money. Those were payments from the state of Illinois that either didn't come or came so late that they had to be applied to the next fiscal year. But when you look across all of those years, from 2008 to 2017, and you try and put it in perspective, if we all hopped in my station wagon and went from Chicago to Los Angeles, 2,018 miles. Our outliers, one year we had 39 miles left in our gas tank. One year we fell short by 43 miles, but on average we had 9.7 miles left in our gas tank when we got to Los Angeles. So we really do run pretty lean as a school district. And we really do focus on balancing our budget. Where's our revenue come from? Property taxes is our largest at 81%. Other local is 4%. That's our tuition payments, your fees, gym locks, lunch receipts, athletic fees. We get 7% in general state aid, 5% in other, which is our categorical payments, and we pick up 3% from the federal government. What you'll see later is that our local revenue is our only revenue that is consistent and the only one that has grown at all. As I mentioned, our operating expenditure revenue per pupil, when you think of all of that money coming in from the local, the state, and the federal government, and you put it towards our operating budget, now this is not our bonds and our interest, this is just our operating budget, we pick up about $13,042 per student annually. We comp to other districts. Those are our comparable districts. We like to compete with them and know that we're outperforming them financially and academically. And those are the folks that we're always checking with to see how we're doing compared to how they're doing. It's Wheaton, Batavia, St. Charles, Elmhurst, Geneva, Naperville, and Barrington. And you can see that their total revenue per pupil is greater than ours. Barrington is $18,735. So to put that into perspective, if I have $100 to spend on a student, they range from about $117 to about $142 per student on just the revenue that they bring in, and I'll share with you how that happens. Our per student revenue by source, the blue line is local, the gold is state, and the dark gray is our federal money. You can see that we bring in less money locally than our comparable districts. We're pretty even across the state level and pretty even across the federal level. I'll go into some more detail on why that happens. As I mentioned, the only revenue source that has consistently been there that we can count on, and the only one that's ever grown over the past decade, has been our local revenue. The state of Illinois has paid us less every year. So we get less from the state of Illinois, and it's less reliable. They may tell us that we're going to get $42 million, and I may budget for $42 million, and at the end of the day, it ends up being $36 million or $37 million because they don't make a payment. Well, here's our expenses. Salaries represent 63% of our expenses. Benefits represent 13%. Purchase services are outsourced services. Our transportation, our custodial and our maintenance, and our food service. If we brought that in-house, our salaries and benefits would come all the way around, and it would be a larger piece of the pie. We don't bring that in-house because it's more cost-effective to outsource it. The benefit plan is not as strong as ours for those individuals, the health benefits, and we don't have to pick up the workers' compensation. And that's an area where you see a lot of injuries because they're on ladders, they're working over hot grills. Supplies and materials, capital outlay. Capital outlay are our major expenses, the roofs, the asphalt, other objects, and non-capitalized equipment. And that's determined by the value of the equipment, if it's over $5,000 or under $5,000. But we are a people business. So when you're cutting programs and you're looking to save money, you do it here. As I mentioned, the operating expense per pupil, how much do we spend annually to operate the district? You can see we spend $11,468. You can see that the state average is $12,973. And you can see that all of our comparable districts is higher. It costs more to educate a student in those districts. And by the way, we get as good, and in most cases, better results. How do we do it? Well, as I mentioned, when you're a people business, you have to have less people. The district's pupil to administrator ratio is 327 students for every one administrator. So we're way down here at the end. The end is 334. And you can see where our comparable districts are. Wheaton, St. Charles, Geneva, Barrington, Batavia, Elmhurst, Naperville, and the state average is 177. 327, there's only 13 school districts in the state of Illinois that have a higher student to administrator ratio. They're all central and southern Illinois school districts. They're all small school districts, mostly are rural school districts. So we are by far the most lean unit school district in the state of Illinois. There's a new funding formula. It's the evidence-based funding formula that's been in the press quite a bit, and the politicians have taken a lot of credit and had a lot of discussions about how the evidence-based funding formula is going to pump more money into the schools. It's a new way that the state's going to fund schools. Part of the way that they're going to fund schools is based on your personality as a school district. How many teachers do you have? How many students do you have? How many administrators do you have? How many LMC directors do you have? What types of kids do you have? How many kids do you have who have challenges learning? Whether it's because they don't have the language skills, or they have a special need, or they're a gifted population that requires an additional resource. And they look at that personality and they apply that personality against 27 elements that says that if you have these numbers of kids, you should have these numbers of resources to serve them, to educate them adequately. So when you look at the evidence-based funding formula, and this came from the state of Illinois, it talks about what would it take to bring a school district in line to educate those students adequately. And again, you can see our comparable districts. The state is saying that for Indian Prairie School District to educate all of the students adequately and put all of those elements in, we need an additional $62 million. Wheaton needs 15, Batavia 5, and you come all the way down at the other end of the spectrum, and right now today, some school districts can implement all of those elements and have money left over. The state has made a commitment over the next 10 years to bring all schools to the same level. I hope I'm around to see it. So why are we so different? And this is just one of our comparable districts. This is us and Naperville 203, and I use 203 because everybody wants to know, why aren't we 203? Why don't we do the things that 203 does? Here's a couple of the differences. We're 84.7% local, they're 89, 7.5 state, 12.2. So we're more dependent upon the state, so when the state doesn't make a payment to us, it means more. Or when they don't balance their budget or pass a budget, it means more. We're 3.1 federal, they're 2.6 federal. But here's the big thing. The equalized assessed valuation is property values. When you look at all of the stores, all of the shopping centers, all of the homes, all of the car dealerships, Fox Valley Mall, all of that is property value that you get to tax against. Residential property value, we're at $3.8 billion. They're at $3.7 billion, almost even. Commercial property, $868 million to $803 million. Industrial, 329 to 11. Agricultural, almost non-existent, but there's still some farmers in both school districts. Railroads, and then total EAV. We've got just over $5 billion in total property value. They have almost $4.6 billion in property value. So what does that mean? It means that when they levy taxes, they've got almost the same amount of property that they can tax that we can tax. But here's the kicker. Oops, excuse me. Our daily attendance, now that's not our enrollment, that's our average daily attendance. You get to pick when kids are in class, right? We've got 26,505. They've got 15,573. They got fewer kids to spend the money on. They've got almost the same amount of property to tax, and they have to tax the same way we do. They can only go up by the Consumer Price Index. So what does that mean? EAV per pupil, when you look at property values per pupil, we have $171,000 worth of property value per student. They have $267,000 worth of property value per student. The state average is $226,000. We've got a lot of students in our school district. And that's what impacts and drives the operating expense per pupil and the revenue per pupil. They get more revenue for more property. They get to spend more on their students. Again, I mentioned how do you operate as lean as we do? How do you outperform folks financially? You've got to be lean on people. So average class size, 26.7. You can see all of our comparable districts are less. The state average is 21. Geneva is below the state average on average class size. Average teacher salary. You can see where we stand on teacher salaries. You can see the state average. You can see that most of our comparable districts outperform us on teacher salary. Essentially, you have less people to do the job and you pay them less. So through this community engagement, we had a variety of topics that were discussed. And folks wanted a summary of what those topics were and what those topics would cost. Bringing our class size, well, let me say one thing first before I go through this list because I'll forget. One of the first Engage 204s was about our demographics and our enrollment and our attendance, our boundaries. We've got overcrowding on the north side of the district. We've got some open space on the south side of the district. We've been working with those challenges and we've made some minor tweaks to elementary attendance boundaries to make that work. One thing that came to the top was we should do a large district enrollment change, a boundary change across all of the schools and across the entire district to try and move more students from the north end of the district to the south end of the district. You won't see this on that topic on this list because now's not the right time to look at it. I found out about 3 weeks ago, and it hit the papers maybe a week ago, that Pulte Homes purchased Wagner Farms, and they're going to build 320 homes. And it's going to fill up a couple of our more empty schools. So we've got to wait till that development takes place. But here are the other topics that rose to the top. Cost to bring the average class size from 27 to 24 is $16.7 million. That's an annual cost. And that brings us to the center, to the middle of our comparable districts. Cost to bring our teacher salaries to the middle of our comparable districts is an additional $7.5 million. Again, that's an annual cost. One thing that we talked about was when we were going through those austere times and in our effort to balance our budget, we've really not put all of the funds that we needed to into our facilities. We're behind on our roof repairs, we're behind on our HVAC systems, we're behind on our tuck pointing, we're behind on our masonry work, our asphalt. And all that deferred maintenance, just to bring us up to what we should have spent, is an additional $10 million to get us to the starting point. We had a firm come in called EMG Assessments. They assess all of the building envelope and all of the structures of schools and look at the life expectancy of those component parts and say that you should spend X amount of money on them. Well, we're not spending that, and I'll talk about it in a second. But the other thing that we did is we had a security firm come in and look at our facilities to give us recommendations on how to make our buildings more secure. One of the recommendations, not all of them, but one of them, and it was a high one, was to update our locks and our intercom system. That's a cost of $2 million. EMG said that we should be spending $8.5 million annually to keep our buildings maintained. So after we fix the deferred maintenance, if we want to stay on top of it, it'll take $8.5 million. To get us to that level, we need another $4 million annually, or we're going to, again, start to fall into a deferred maintenance mode. We started an initiative to air condition our 19 elementary schools that are un-air conditioned because the parents really wanted it. We wanted to keep the kids in attendance. When kids aren't in attendance for heat, we lose state money. We are just finalizing phase 4. To finish that project, it's an additional $7 million. Now, the way that we've finished that project so far is if the state makes a late payment and they get it the next fiscal year, and wasn't expected, let's try and get some air conditioning done. So we've been piecemealing the air conditioning project. We've got an alternative high school that is reaching its end of its useful life, 75 years, and it's well past 75 years, the building. And we've got a STEPS program, a transition program, and for us to find space, to lease space for them is going to be $1.2 million annually. And as you all are aware, the social, emotional, health needs, physical needs of our students is changing. We feel a need to bring more mental health professionals and instructional coaches in to deal with some of the kids who are making incredibly difficult choices. And they're making the headlines in very graphic ways. And that's $4.2 million to bring that staff in and have enough staff for all of our schools. So our challenges, the current revenue limits what programs and services we can add. We really don't have it. The district needs to know what your priorities are when you look at all of those areas of need and all of those things that rose to the top during all of those different community engagements. And how do we find a fiscally responsible way to give the community what they want? The entire cost of all of those activities, if we were to implement them all, is just over $52 million. So the charge for you all, I'm going to pass it over to Mark, is to help us prioritize what do we do and how do we get it done.